In Miles City, Montana Territory, on the 14th of October, 1886, they sold a woman in the small pen at the back of the Tongue River sale barn, and the barn smelled of wet manure and cottonwood smoke and the cold iron smell of a season turning, and there were 19 men there to watch it, and one of them was not watching. The auctioneer's name was Emmett Coyne. He was a labor agent out of St. Paul who moved women west under contracts of service, and he had learned in 11 years of the trade that a man will pay more for a thing he believes he has caught cheap, and that the surest way to make a man believe it is to run the article down yourself, out loud, in front of him. So he did it thoroughly. He stood Vera Lund on the scale platform in a gray dress and a wool shawl, in the flat noon light, coming through the barn doors, and he read from a half-sheet of paper in his own handwriting. Left hand and forearm burned in a kerosene fire in the spring of 1881, he said, and the fingers would not close all the way. Left leg broken in the same year and set by a man who was not a doctor, so there was a limp, and there would always be a limp. Deaf in the left ear. 25 years old, which was old for the trade, and he would not pretend otherwise. Doctored at 19 for a fever that a physician in Fargo had said would leave her barren, so a man buying with a family in mind should buy elsewhere. Quiet to the point that some had thought her simple, though he did not say she was. Sold once already in Dakota and returned, he said, which spoke for itself. I will be honest with you boys, Emmett Coyne said, because there is no profit in the other thing. She is too broke to love, and I am selling her for work. Start me at $40. The narrator has been in a good many rooms and will say plainly that the ugliest thing in that barn was not the list. It was the way 19 grown men looked at the floor and let it be read. Vera Lund stood on the platform and looked out over their heads at the doors. She had decided somewhere back in Dakota that she would not cry in front of any of them ever again, and she had kept to it for 19 months, and she kept to it that noon. The bidding got to $65 and stalled, because the men who wanted a woman did not want that list, and the men who wanted a hand could hire one for $20 a month. And then a voice from the back of the barn, by the doors, said, $200. Everybody turned. The man had not moved from where he had been standing for a quarter of an hour with his shoulder on the doorframe and his hat brimmed down. He was big through the shoulders and gone gray at the sides, better than 40, with a scar that came out of his collar and stopped under his jaw, and he did not come forward, and he did not walk around the platform, and he did not look up. 200, Emmett Coyne said, is a good deal of money for. 200 was the price you asked when you wrote to the county in September. I read the notice. The man's voice was low and did not carry the way a shout carries. It carried the way a shut door carries. I ain't bidding against nobody. I am paying what you asked for. You can take it, or you can go on talking. He counted it out on the head of a barrel by the door, in gold and paper, and he still did not look up, and every man in that barn watched him not do it. He signed the transfer, and Coyne handed across the paper, and the man folded it into his coat without reading it, and said, "To the general heir of the barn, ma'am, I got a wagon out front. You are welcome to it, and you are welcome to walk. Either one." Vera Lund came down off the scale platform on her own feet, which took her a moment on account of the leg, and nobody offered her a hand, and she had not expected one. She walked out into the sun and got up on the wagon seat by herself. His name was Asa Rourke, and he had 411 acres deeded, and a great deal more he did not, on the Tongue River 19 miles south of town, and he was 43 years old and had been in that country since 1873. They did not speak for the first 6 miles. The wagon went south along the river through cottonwood bottoms gone yellow and dropping, and the air had the hard, clean edge that Montana air gets in the middle of October, and away off east the brakes stood up brown and folded like a blanket kicked to the foot of a bed. At the crossing he pulled up and got down and stood at the near wheel, still not looking at her, and took the folded paper out of his coat and tore it in half and in half again and put the pieces in her hand. "That is the transfer," he said. "There ain't but the one, and now there ain't that. You do not owe me $200 nor 200 hours. There is $40 in the tin on the shelf when we get there, and the eastbound leaves Miles City Tuesdays and Fridays, and if you want it, Ocean will drive you in and see you onto it, and there will not be one word said about it, not that day nor after." Vera Lund looked at the pieces of paper in her hand. "Why did you not look at me?" she said. It was the first thing she had said out loud in 4 days. And Asa Rourke stood at the wheel of that wagon in the middle of the Tongue River crossing with the water going over the stones, and gave her the short answer, because the long one was 17 years deep, and he could not get at it yet. Because looking is what he was selling, he said. Every man in that barn paid him in looking, and I would not do it. And I will tell you now, so you never have to wonder about it, I have not looked at you, and I am not going to. Not the way that barn looked at you. Not one time. Not if you stay 40 years. Vera Lund put her hand over her mouth and held it there for about 11 seconds, and then she took it away and said, "All right," and they drove on. That is the part the men from the barn told and retold for 20 years afterward, and it is why the story of the Miles City sale got told at all. The ranch lay in a bend with the river on 2 sides and a rimrock behind it, a log house with a sod and shake roof, a barn better built than the house, a corral, a smokehouse, and a windmill that had been creaking since 1879 and had 11 years of creek left in it. There was one hand, a black cowboy named Ocean Bell, 52 years old, who had worked that river since before Asa bought in, and who took one look at the woman on the wagon seat and one look at his employer and made up his mind about the entire business in under 4 seconds, which he said afterward was longer than he needed. Asa carried her bundle into the house and set it down and did not go in past the table. There is the stove, and there is the bed, and there is a bar on that door, and it works. I put it on this morning, he said. I am in the bunkhouse with Ocean. That is where I sleep from tonight on, and that is not a thing you have to think about again. Then he set something on the shelf by the window and went out. It was a looking glass, tin framed, 6 inches across, bought that morning at the Mercantile in Miles City for $1 and 10 cents out of a poke that could not spare it. He had bought it before the sale, on the chance, because it had occurred to him standing in the store that a woman coming off a scale platform might not own one, and that a person ought to have the choice. Vera Lund stood in the middle of that house for a long while. Then she went to the shelf and turned the little mirror around to face the wall, and left it that way, and went to see about the stove. The stove drew badly. She had it apart in 20 minutes and found the damper rod bent and the pipe packed 6 inches deep with creosote, and she cleaned it out with a stick and a rag and put it together and had a fire that did not smoke. And when Asa came in at dark, he stopped in the door and said, "Huh," and Ocean Bell laughed out loud for the first time since August. She was a Norwegian farmer's daughter out of the Red River Valley, and what she knew from 12 years of doing it before the fire and the leg and the rest of it. She knew dairy. She knew haying. She knew how a stack is built so it sheds water instead of holding it, which is a thing not one cattleman in 10 on the Montana range in 1886 had ever troubled to learn, because there had been no need to learn it in a country where the grass cured on the stem and the cattle wintered out and always had. Through the last of October and into November the days went quiet, and the narrator will not pretend they were eventful, because that was their entire value. She kept the house, and then she kept more than the house. She took the milk cow, then the chickens, then the garden that had gone to weeds in 1884. She rebuilt the corral gate on a hinge that did not drag. She would not go into town. Asa did not ask her to. He noticed things and did not say them. He noticed she slept with a chair under the door handle for the first 11 nights, and then stopped. He noticed she stood on the right side of anybody who spoke to her, always, so the good ear was toward them, and that she did it so smoothly that a person could know her a month and never work out why. He noticed she never once turned that mirror around, and she noticed, because she could not help it, that he still did not look at her. She had thanked him for the mirror, and he had looked at the stove. She had handed him the coffee, and he had looked at the cup. She lay awake some nights that first month working out that a man who had paid $200 and torn up the paper might still not be able to stand the sight of a burned hand and a limp, and that of all the ways she had been thought of in 5 years, that one hurt in a place she had believed was already used up. She did not ask him. She had asked one question at the river crossing and used up a year's worth of courage on it. On the 9th of November, she came in from the coulee at noon and stood in the door with her shawl still on. "You have to sell," she said. Asa Rourke set down his cup. "The geese went 3 weeks early," said Vera Lund. "All of them, in 4 days. And they went high, and they did not come back down. The muskrats have built their houses up in the sloughs a foot higher than the water, which they do not do for nothing. The horses came in with double coats in the middle of October. The beaver have cut twice the wood they cut last year, and I counted it, and there is not one antelope left on this side of the river, and there were 40 in September." She had her hands folded in front of her. "In the valley we called it a killing winter. I have seen 2. There is one coming, and it is coming on a range that has been eaten to the dirt all summer, and you have got 1,100 head out on grass that is not there, and no hay put up at all." Asa looked at Ocean. Ocean looked back at him. "Every outfit on this river winters out," Asa said slowly. "That is how it is done here. Always has been." "Yes," said Vera. "And every one of them will lose 8 cows in 10, and you will lose 8 in 10, and I would rather you did not." And that is the moment, a Tuesday noon, in a log house on the Tongue River, with a woman in a shawl, and a man who had not yet looked at her, when this story stopped being about a sale and became about a winter. Before that winter came down out of Canada, and it did, and it is still remembered by name, there were 6 good weeks on the Tongue River, and a stackyard rose behind that barn where there had never been one. If you have stayed with this story this far, stay a while longer. What comes next is the part that changes everything. And if you find yourself moved by tales of love that survived the worst the West could throw at them, the bell beneath this story is how we keep meeting like this. He sold 640 head in Miles City in the 3rd week of November at $9 and change, which was $4 under what he had been offered in September, and the men at the stockyard told him he was a fool to his face, and he agreed with them and took the money. Then he bought hay. Every ton within 30 miles from the Bohemian farmers on the Yellowstone who had it and could not sell it, at prices that made Ocean Bell shut his eyes, and Vera Lund showed the 2 of them and 4 hired men how to build a stack that sheds, bottomed on brush, walls kept plumb, The top swept up into a ridge and combed down, roped over, and they built 9 of them in the yard behind the barn between the 22nd of November and the 8th of December, and they were the only stacks of that shape in Custer County. Emmett Coyne came out from town on the 11th of December with 2 men and a paper. He was pleasant about it. That was the worst of it. He sat his horse in the yard and explained, reasonably, that what had been sold in October was his interest in the matter, and not the term itself. That Miss Lund had signed an indenture in Fargo in 1885 with 4 years and 2 months yet to run. That he was within his rights to assign it or enforce it, and that he was not an unreasonable man, and $300 would close the whole account, and he would not trouble anybody again. Asa Rourke came out of the barn with his hands empty and stopped in the middle of the yard. "She ain't property," he said. "She was not in October, and she ain't now. There is no paper in Montana Territory that makes a person into a debt you can carry. And if there was, I would still not pay you $300, and if I had it, I would still not." He looked at the 2 men, and then at Coyne. "You are on my place. Right off it. You are making an enemy for a woman you have owned 8 weeks. "I have not owned her 1 minute, Asa said. "That is the difference between us, and you have rode 19 miles to find it out." They went, and Emmett Coyne, who was a businessman before he was anything else, rode straight back to Miles City and spent 4 days telling the story of how Asa Rourke had bought a woman at the sale barn and kept her out on the Tongue River without a preacher, which was true, and which was the shape of it, and which was all anybody needed. The bank at Miles City called his note on the 28th of December. 2 neighbors he had branded with for 11 years did not come to the New Year's dance. The mercantile wanted cash. Vera did not say she was sorry, because she had worked out that he would not have wanted it. What she did instead was walk out to the stackyard on the last day of the year with a lantern in the dark, alone, and pace it, and come back in and set a sheet of paper on the table, where Asa would find it in the morning, 9 stacks, measured, at 8 pounds of hay per head per day, and a number at the bottom. 460 head wintered through to the 15th of April. He kept that sheet of paper for the rest of his life. The talk came on a Sunday in January, in the house, with the stove going and the thermometer on the north wall of the barn reading 31 below at 4 in the afternoon. She told him hers first, and she told it flat and in order, which is how the deepest kind comes out. The kerosene lamp that went over in the spring of 1881 in a soddy in Dakota, and her mother in it. The leg broken, getting her out and set by a neighbor because the doctor was 40 miles. Her father gone the following winter. The fever at 19, and the man in Fargo who told her, in a room with the door open and 2 other people in it, that she would never bear a child, and how he had said it in the tone of a man reading a freight bill, the indenture she signed at 23, because there was nothing else. Dakota, and the man who bought the term and sent her back in 8 weeks, and wrote unsuitable on the paper. "I have been looked at by a great many people," she said, "and I have got to where I can tell in about 1 second which kind it is. And I have been in this house 11 weeks, Asa Rourke, and you have not looked at me 1 time, and I have told myself 40 different reasons why, and I do not believe any of them any more. So I am asking, is it the hand?" Asa Rourke sat with his forearms on his knees and his eyes on the floor, and he was quiet for so long that the stove settled twice. "I was at Andersonville," he said, "in Georgia. 11 months, from the March of '64. Vera did not move. There was a thing they did," he said. "Every so often they would turn us out and stand us up and walk down the line and look us over. Not for anything, not to count, just to see what was left. And a man would come along and take a hold of your jaw and turn your head and look and let go and go on to the next one and write something down. His voice had not changed at all, which was worse. There were 900 of us on that line, and not one of us was a person to the man walking it. I was 21 years old. I have been out of there 21 years this spring, and I have never been able to make myself do it to anybody. I cannot even do it to a horse I am buying. Ocean buys the horses. He turned his hands over and looked at them, and they were not steady, and he let her see that they were not. So when he stood you up on that platform and read that paper out loud, Asa said, I knew what it was. I have been on that platform, and I thought, I have got $200 in my coat and I can end this in one sentence, and I will not pay 1 cent of it in looking. He stopped, and then I brought you home, and I could not undo the habit. And you have been sitting in my house 11 weeks thinking it was your hand. Ma'am, I would rather have been shot. Vera Lund got up out of her chair. She crossed the 8 feet of that floor herself, and the narrator sets that down plainly, because there was nothing in the world compelling her to do it. She went to the shelf by the window, and she turned the little tin-framed looking-glass around to face the room, for the first time since the 14th of October. Then look at me now, she said, on purpose, because I am asking you to, and that is not the same thing at all. Asa Rourke raised his head and looked at her. What passed between them then was brief, and it was the first kiss either of them had known in a long time, and what broke open in her was not longing, but the plain unbearable relief of being seen entire by a man who had already been told every last thing that was supposed to make her not worth the looking. The storm came down on the 9th of January and did not lift for 11 days, and after that came the false thaw, and then the rain, and then 40 below on top of the ice, and the range in Montana Territory locked up under a shell a horse could not break with its hoof, and cattle stood in the coulees and died on their feet by the tens of thousands. Men who had come out in 1882 with money went home in 1887 with nothing. The country never was the same country again. Emmett Coyne came out on the 2nd of February with the same 2 men and a can of coal oil. He fired the stackyard at 3 in the morning in a wind, and it was the one thing he could do that would finish Asa Rourke and leave no mark on himself, and it very nearly worked. Asa was out of the house in his boots and coat with a wet tarp, and he saved 4 stacks of the 9 and lost 5, and Coyne shot him at the corner of the barn as he came around it with the tarp in his hands, and left him in the snow, and rode off believing the cold would do the rest. Vera Lund found him at 4:30 by the light of what was still burning. She could not carry him. She got the sledge out of the barn and rolled him onto it and dragged it 40 yards to the house on packed snow with a leg that had never healed right, and got him over the sill, and stopped the bleeding with her own good hand and a scalding rag, and packed the wound and put every quilt in that house on him, and sat with him through the rest of that night and the day and the night after while. The fever came up. She had already, before any of that, sent Ocean Bell to Miles City. She had sent him on the 11th of December, the day Coyne rode out of the yard, with the half-sheet of paper the auctioneer had read from, which she had picked up off the barrelhead in the sale barn on the 14th of October, and carried in the lining of her shawl for 4 months, because she was a woman who kept things. On the front of it was the list of everything wrong with her, in Emmett Coyne's hand. On the back of it was Coyne's own tally, 11 names, with places and dates and prices, going back to 1883. 2 of the 11 had been 15 years old, Ocean Bell had put that paper into the hand of a deputy United States Marshal in Miles City on the 12th of December, and the marshal had been working on it quietly for 7 weeks, and he was 19 miles out on the Miles City Road at first light on the 3rd of February with 4 men when Emmett Coyne rode north into them. Coyne was tried at Miles City in the June term of 1887 on the federal count and on the shooting both, and Vera Lund was in that courtroom and gave her evidence standing up, and it took the jury under an hour. He went to the territorial prison at Deer Lodge for 20 years and died there in 1899. 2 of the 11 women on the back of that paper were found and written to. One of them came out to Montana in 1890 and stayed. By the middle of April, the country was carrying from the Yellowstone to the Powder, and outfits that had run 20,000 head counted their losses in whole percentages of what was left. Asa Rourke came out of that winter with 391 head alive out of 460 wintered, because of 9 stacks of hay built the way they build them in the Red River Valley, 4 of which had burned and 5 of which had not. He was on a stick until June and always afterward stood a little crooked in cold weather. He and Vera Lund were married at the house on the Tongue River on the 11th of June, 1887, by a circuit preacher, with Ocean Bell standing up with him and 11 people there, 4 of whom were neighbors who had not come to the New Year's dance and who did not say anything about it and were not asked to. The bank at Miles City, which had called his note in December, wrote in August to offer him a loan on very good terms. The bank, having noticed which outfit on the Tongue River still had cattle standing on it. Vera read the letter twice and said he ought to take it, and he took it, and they bought the Bohemian's place on the Yellowstone in 1889 and put up hay on it every year for 31 years. There was no child. That is in the story because it was in their lives, and because the woman on the scale platform had been sold with it read out loud like a defect in a horse, and because it was not a defect and never had been. In 1892 they took in a boy of 9 whose people had died at Ashland, and in 1896 his sister, and neither of those 2 ever called them anything but what they called them. And that is nobody's business but theirs. On the wall beside the door of the house, on the Yellowstone, at the height of a person's face, hung a tin framed looking glass 6 inches across, bought in a mercantile in Miles City on the 14th of October, 1886, for $1.10 by a man who did not yet know whether he would have anybody to give it to. Vera Rourke used it every morning of her life. She was not vain, and she was not ashamed either, and she had got a long time ago to where she could not always remember which of those had come first. Asa was in the door behind her one morning in the spring of 1911, with his hat in his hand, waiting on her to be ready, and she caught him in the glass and saw that he was looking at her plainly, straight on, the way he had done every day for 24 years since a Sunday in January when she asked him to. "You are staring, Mr. Rourke," she said. "I am," said Asa. "On purpose. If your heart has ever leaned toward a story where love arrived quiet and stayed long enough to change everything, then this story was for you. Out on the high plains of Montana, where the wind keeps the only memory of what was, the love between Asa Rourke and Vera Lund became the kind that does not need anybody to remember it to be real, though the men who were in that sale barn remembered it, every one of them, for the rest of their lives. If stories of frontier love that endured through hardship, prejudice, and the kind of silence only the West knows speak to you, follow the Lonesome Trail for more. Here, the love stories are quiet, the courage is real, and the last word is always worth the wait. Until the next trail.